She was equipped with a clipboard, high-end heels, and a 6-year reign of HOA tyranny. What she lacked, however, was any legal authority for her actions. Linda Hawthorne stood in my driveway on that Tuesday morning, brandishing a violation notice as if it were a royal edict. A $500 monthly fee for parking my own trucks on my own land. The sheer nerve was astonishing. These HOA despots behaved as if they had dominion over my life. While she threatened to foreclose on my home due to an excess of vehicles, her husband's enormous RV was a permanent fixture in their yard, a veritable monument to their hypocrisy. The woman truly thought she could seize my property while flouting her own regulations. What Linda was unaware of was poised to ruin her entirely. Hidden away in dusty county archives was a document that would completely reverse this power dynamic. It was something that would change her status from neighborhood dictator to criminal defendant more quickly than concrete cures in the summer sun. Have you ever yearned to utterly dismantle someone who believed they held power over you? That is precisely what transpired here, and the vengeance was so satisfying it remains legendary in Riverside County. Allow me to set the stage for how this entire ordeal began. My name is Mike Torres. I am 52 years old, and I operate Torres Concrete Solutions right here in Riverside, California. I'm a third-generation contractor. My grandfather began his journey with just a wheelbarrow and a vision. My father expanded it into a legitimate enterprise, and I grew it into a $2.3 million operation that employs 15 local men. 6 months prior, I had undergone a divorce that felt akin to financial surgery performed without anesthetic. It was nothing overly dramatic, just the story of two people who had drifted apart. But I was in need of a new beginning. My ex-wife's attorney had exhausted all avenues for finding more assets to split. Consequently, I purchased a pristine 3-bedroom ranch house in the Maple Ridge subdivision for $485,000 in cash. It was the ideal neighborhood, the kind of place where the scent of fresh mulch and Saturday morning coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of jasmine from white picket fences. I invested an additional $30,000 in landscaping because I'm a firm believer in doing things properly. My 3 work trucks, a concrete mixer, a flatbed, and a crew pickup, were parked tidily in my circular driveway like dormant giants. That was when I first encountered Linda Hawthorne. And I must say, meeting Linda was like stepping on a landmine camouflaged as a welcome mat. Imagine a 58-year-old retired bank manager who had served as HOA president for 6 consecutive years, running unopposed. She resided in the neighborhood's showpiece, a massive colonial-style home that likely cost $800,000 and appeared to be straight out of a mortgage advertisement. This woman measured lawn height with an actual ruler and carried a clipboard on her morning inspection patrols. Her designer heels clicked on the pavement like a metronome ticking down to someone's imminent ruin. This happened every morning at precisely 8:15 a.m. The first time she introduced herself, I should have immediately called a moving company. "Welcome to Maple Ridge, Mr. Torres. I trust you understand our community maintains certain standards. Not, 'nice to meet you,' or 'welcome to the neighborhood.'" She spoke of community standards as if she were an immigration officer and I was seeking a 3-month visa. For a while, everything appeared to be fine. I kept my property looking picture perfect. I assisted my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Morgan, with her groceries. I even repaired her cracked walkway at no charge. My trucks were parked lawfully in my own driveway, just like everyone else's boats, RVs, and luxury vehicles. Then came that Tuesday morning in October when my doorbell chimed at 7:30 a.m. It was the mail carrier with a certified letter that felt like a legal hand grenade. The paper was inexpensive copy stock, but the thread it carried was of premium quality. Violation notice was emblazoned in bold red letters. Commercial vehicles exceed community aesthetic standards and negatively impact property values. Immediate compliance required or face escalating penalties. This is where the situation became particularly interesting. Linda was demanding I pay a $500 monthly aesthetic impact fee or remove my trucks from the property entirely. $500 to park my legally registered work vehicles on property I owned outright. That evening, I dedicated myself to reading every single page of my HOA covenants, twice. There was absolutely no mention of restrictions on commercial vehicles anywhere. But here is the delightful irony. Every Wednesday, Linda's own landscaping crew parked their diesel trailer, industrial mowers, and chemical tanks directly in front of her house for 4 hours straight. The acrid smell of their equipment's exhaust would hang in the air like automotive hypocrisy. When I knocked on her door later that evening to discuss the matter like rational adults, Linda stood in her doorway as if she were defending the Alamo. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I've reviewed the covenants. There is no restriction on work vehicles. The board has the authority to implement new rules for the community's welfare. Your industrial trucks are inappropriate for a residential area, but your landscapers park their commercial vehicles here on a weekly basis." Her smile could have curdled antifreeze. "That's different. That's a maintenance service, not industrial storage." Different. In that moment, observing her expression, I came to the realization that this issue was not about trucks or property values. It was about power, control, and possibly something far uglier, like determining who was worthy of living in her neighborhood. I was faced with two options: surrender or fight back. What Linda didn't realize was that she had just declared war on someone who was on the verge of discovering he owned the entire battlefield. But first, she was about to provide me with even more ammunition. Linda wasted no time in escalating this conflict. 3 days following our doorway confrontation, I discovered another certified letter in my mailbox. An emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. A mere 24 hours notice for a meeting intended to address ongoing community compliance issues. I arrived to find precisely 3 individuals in Linda's living room: herself, her neighbor Margaret Finch, and a rental property owner named Bob. This constituted only 3 of the 7 board members. The room smelled of vanilla candles and sheer desperation, because what they were attempting was utterly illegal. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Torres," Linda stated, settling into her wingback chair like a budget dictator. "We've convened this meeting to address the commercial vehicle situation." I took out my phone and began recording. "This meeting is in violation of HOA bylaws, which mandate a 7-day advance notice." Linda's smile could have soured milk. "Emergency situations permit expedited proceedings." What emergency? My trucks have been parked there for months. That's when Bob attempted to act as a mediator. "Look, Mike, we're simply trying to protect property values. Perhaps we can find a solution." "The board has already voted," Linda announced. "The commercial vehicle ordinance has passed. You have until Monday to comply, or you will face daily fines of $100. I leaned back in their uncomfortable folding chair. "You voted?" "I didn't witness any vote." "We voted before your arrival," Margaret mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Perfect. A secret vote conducted before an illegal meeting to pass an invalid ordinance." These individuals had clearly missed the lesson on HOA law during their dictator training. You see, I had learned a valuable lesson during my divorce proceedings. Bylaws are contracts, and when boards enforce rules selectively, they violate the equal protection principles that courts take great pleasure in dismantling. That weekend, I conducted an investigation that would have made a private detective beam with pride. It turned out that Linda's son, Danny, operates Hawthorne Landscaping and parks his trailer, industrial mowers, and chemical tanks in our neighborhood overnight twice a week. This wasn't during service calls, it was overnight storage. Meanwhile, Linda's husband, Frank, had a 35-foot RV and a boat trailer permanently situated in their side yard, standing as monuments to their hypocrisy. Monday morning dawned with the sweet sound of opportunity knocking. The next board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center, and I arrived armed with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. I had invited Mrs. Morgan and our neighbor Jake Patterson as witnesses because what I was about to do merited an audience. "Before we discuss my trucks," I declared, standing with my folder of evidence, "let's address some inconsistencies in enforcement." I laid out photos across the table like a poker dealer revealing a winning hand. Danny's landscaping trailer parked overnight on Maple Street, Frank's RV violating their own aesthetic standards, and 3 other neighbors with work vans, boats, and recreational vehicles that had somehow remained invisible to Linda's watchful eyes. The silence in the room was so thick you could spread it on toast. Bob looked as though he would rather be undergoing a root canal, and Margaret's pen clicking sounded like a nervous woodpecker. "This is targeted harassment," I continued. "You've created rules specifically to attack me while making exemptions for your friends and family." Linda's face was approaching the color of a fire engine. "Those are different situations." "How exactly?" Mr. Hawthorne's RV is grandfathered in under previous regulations. Show me those regulations. More silence. The air conditioning unit kicked on, its hum sounding like it was laughing at this circus. And your son's overnight parking? That's temporary business equipment staging. My trucks are temporary business equipment staging. Your trucks are industrial. And your son's 500-gallon chemical sprayer isn't industrial. Jake Patterson raised his hand as if we were in elementary school. When were these grandfather clauses established? Bob shifted uncomfortably, as if his chair were made of needles. We haven't formally documented. So they don't exist, I interrupted. You're inventing exemptions in real time. Linda shot up from her chair as if she'd been launched by an ejector seat. This meeting is about Mr. Torres's noncompliance, not the board's authority. This is where the situation took a turn. I pulled out my phone and held it up like a trophy. Actually, this meeting is about selective enforcement and discrimination. I am recording everything for my attorney, and every ridiculous excuse you've offered tonight has just become evidence. The room fell dead silent, except for the frantic clicking of Margaret's pen. Bob looked as though he wanted to tunnel his way through the floor to escape. Mrs. Hawthorne, I said, savoring every moment, either enforce your rules equally or admit they are baseless. But I will not be paying extortion fees for violations that half the neighborhood commits on a daily basis. Linda's composure finally shattered like cheap glass. Her voice rose an octave. Mr. Torres, if you persist with this disruptive behavior, we will be compelled to take stronger action. There it was, the threat I had been anticipating. Because what Linda didn't know was that while she had been engrossed in playing neighborhood dictator, I had already begun to investigate her background. And what I had unearthed was about to turn her world upside down faster than a concrete mixer in an earthquake. Linda's stronger action descended like a plague of locusts. On Wednesday morning, as I was loading concrete mix, a white city van pulled up. Out stepped Linda, accompanied by a man with a clipboard and a hard hat, her former colleague from the planning department, judging by their friendly conversation. The morning air carried the scent of fresh asphalt and impending bureaucratic conflict. Anonymous complaints about noise and safety violations, she declared with the smugness of a cat presenting a dead mouse. This inspector appeared as though he would rather be undergoing a colonoscopy, likely because arriving with the complainant obliterated any semblance of impartiality. I observed this poor man as he spent 20 minutes walking around my property, measuring setbacks, verifying permits, and photographing everything as if he were documenting a crime scene. Linda stood behind him, pointing at my trucks and murmuring suggestions that sounded suspiciously like coaching a witness. The concrete dust from my mixing area tickled my nose as I awaited their judgment. When he concluded his inspection, the man actually smiled and shook my hand. A beautiful setup, Mr. Torres. Your concrete pad exceeds code requirements. The trucks are properly registered, and your property maintenance is exemplary. No violations found. Linda's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a microwave. But she was not finished playing her games. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the State Contractor Licensing Board, referencing anonymous complaints about illegal business operations on a residential property. Someone had filed a formal grievance, alleging that I was running an unlicensed commercial operation, storing hazardous materials, and violating zoning laws. The complaint was detailed, specific, and entirely fabricated. I would have bet my favorite sledgehammer that Linda's manicured fingerprints were all over that paperwork, along with the lingering scent of her vanilla perfume. While contending with that bureaucratic nightmare, I decided to investigate Linda's background more extensively. My accountant friend, Bobby Morgan, had taught me some techniques during my divorce for unearthing financial records, and what I found made Linda's harassment campaign seem like child's play. She had filed for bankruptcy 3 years prior, then refinanced her home twice within 18 months. Her credit report displayed more red flags than a Soviet military parade. Most intriguingly, there was a pattern that caused my blood pressure to spike. She had been targeting specific homeowners for violations, and every single one of them had sold their homes within 6 months at prices below market value. This was about more than just my trucks. Linda was orchestrating a systematic harassment campaign designed to drive out working-class families and attract higher-income residents. During my years in the construction industry, I had learned that board members owe what is known as a fiduciary duty to all homeowners. Essentially, They cannot use their positions to settle personal vendettas without courts awarding substantial financial damages to the victims. Her complaint letters followed identical templates. Her violation notices targeted the same demographics, and her emergency meetings always seemed to coincide with properties being listed on the market. She was gentrifying the neighborhood, one lawsuit at a time. I retained the services of attorney Patricia Valdez, who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for turning board presidents into legal roadkill. After reviewing my documentation, Patricia filed formal complaints regarding selective enforcement and requested complete audits of the HOA's finances and Linda's decision-making process. The smile on Patricia's face as she explained the potential damages reminded me why I always hired the most skilled subcontractors. Linda's reaction was predictably thermonuclear. She called for a special assessment vote for neighborhood beautification, proposing a $5,000 per household fee for aesthetic improvements and community enhancement. During her presentation at the community center, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead like irate wasps as she repeatedly mentioned how this would maintain appropriate neighborhood standards and attract quality residents. Her supporters, primarily retirees and owners of McMansions, nodded in agreement like dashboard bobbleheads, while working families looked as though they had just been struck by a financial freight train. After the meeting, Linda confronted me in the parking lot, where the smell of cooling asphalt mingled with her desperation. "Mr. Torres, this could all be resolved if you would just be reasonable about your truck situation." I took out my phone and began recording. Define reasonable. Her eyes glittered like broken glass in the streetlight. A modest relocation fee to cover administrative costs. Say $50,000. The figure struck me like a sledgehammer to the gut. There it was, attempted extortion, captured on a digital recording. Linda had just handed me enough evidence to bury her deeper than a septic tank foundation. The community was fracturing more rapidly than concrete in an earthquake. Working families began organizing resistance meetings in Jake Patterson's garage, while Linda's supporters formed her Neighborhood Standards Committee. Mrs. Morgan confided in me that Linda had visited her, suggesting that elderly residents might be happier in senior communities with proper support services. 3 more families received foreclosure threats based on fabricated violations. Jake was cited for his children's bicycles being improperly stored in his own garage. Sarah Mills, a teacher, was written up for driving a car that was inconsistent with community image standards. But Linda had made one catastrophic error in her pursuit of suburban dictatorship. She had declared war on someone who was about to discover that he possessed legal weapons of mass destruction in this particular conflict. While she was playing the part of a petty tyrant, I was uncovering something in the county records that would detonate her entire power structure like a controlled demolition. Linda's next maneuver was so audacious it warranted an award for neighborhood villainy. She announced a partnership with Pinnacle Properties, a development firm specializing in transforming modest subdivisions into luxurious playgrounds for the affluent. At a hastily convened board meeting, the conference room reeked of cheap coffee and expensive schemes as Linda presented glossy brochures illustrating enhanced neighborhood concepts that featured upscale condominiums and premium amenities. She explained how selling our common areas for community improvement would generate funds for beautification, conveniently neglecting to mention that her husband, Frank, had been secretly consulting for Pinnacle Properties for 6 months, earning fees that mysteriously aligned with their mortgage payments. I had uncovered Frank's consulting arrangement through financial records, but chose to let Linda dig her own grave before I handed her the shovel. Sometimes in construction, the most strategic move is to watch the other crew's foundation crack before pointing out their structural flaws. Jake Patterson, utilizing his background in journalism, had been documenting Linda's clandestine meetings with Pinnacle representatives, photographing license plates, and recording their visit schedules. Our investigation unearthed a systematic acquisition strategy that targeted distressed properties at prices below market value, with the ultimate goal of redeveloping the entire subdivision into luxury housing that working families could not afford. The harassment campaign intensified, escalating like a natural disaster gathering momentum. Linda implemented monthly compliance inspections that felt more like military occupations than neighborhood oversight. She issued violations for grass height variations of a mere half-inch, mailbox colors that allegedly breached community aesthetics, and Mrs. Morgan's beloved garden gnome collection, which apparently posed a threat to residential dignity. The metallic click of Linda's designer heels on the concrete sidewalks became our neighborhood's air raid siren, a warning for residents to conceal anything that might incite her regulatory fury. My concrete business became the primary target on her battlefield. Linda threatened legal action for chronic noncompliance and asserted her authority to ban my customers from neighborhood streets. When the Hendersons hired me to replace their deteriorating driveway, Linda positioned herself like a surveillance operative, photographing truck movements and timing concrete deliveries with stopwatch-like precision. She attempted to find neighbors who had hired my services, contending that they were facilitating violations of established community standards. Watching Linda attempt to intimidate 40,000-pound concrete mixers was like observing someone trying to herd elephants with a feather duster and unrealistic expectations. Linda's nuclear strategy laid bare her true intentions with crystalline clarity. She filed property liens against 5 homes, including my own, for accumulated unpaid assessments and violation penalties. Her legal notices claimed foreclosure authority within 90 days if payments were not immediately remitted. These documents arrived via certified mail, carrying the weight of official courthouse papers, but they were built on legal foundations as shaky as a condemned building in an earthquake zone. Linda was, in essence, threatening to steal our homes for violations of questionable legitimacy. During this phase of escalation, I conducted investigations that would have impressed professional detectives. Attorney Patricia had advised requesting comprehensive HOA records under state disclosure laws, and the files I received contained more explosive material than a demolition warehouse. Linda had systematically diverted HOA funds for personal legal expenses, disguising her bankruptcy attorney's fees as administrative consultations. Community reserve funds earmarked for maintenance had vanished into unauthorized expenditures that coincidentally matched Linda's documented financial emergencies. The definitive proof emerged when I discovered email exchanges between Linda and Pinnacle Properties discussing residential demographic optimization and the clearing of problematic current residents. One message explicitly targeted working-class homeowners and ethnic families who allegedly would not match the upgraded community profile standards. Reading those communications felt like uncovering a conspiracy documented in black and white, complete with strategic timelines for manufacturing violations and accelerating foreclosure proceedings. The stench of discrimination was more potent than the fumes from concrete sealer. Mrs. Morgan tearfully disclosed that Linda had visited her with legal paperwork suggesting incompetency proceedings, claiming that elderly residents required professional care environments rather than independent neighborhood living. Jake Patterson documented systematic harassment concerning his children's outdoor toys, which Linda had classified as unsightly residential deterioration factors. Sarah Mills, our divorced teacher neighbor, faced relentless targeting for driving a modest Honda instead of the luxury vehicles that matched Linda's community expectation standards. Our neighborhood fractured more quickly than poorly mixed concrete in freezing temperatures. Linda's supporters, predominantly affluent retirees in oversized houses, formed her Community Standards Coalition, while working families organized resistance meetings that resembled underground revolutionary gatherings. Property values plummeted due to the constant chaos, which perfectly aligned with Linda's agenda of creating distressed sale opportunities for her development conspiracy partners. 3 more families received foreclosure threats, prompting local news coverage of our escalating neighborhood conflict. Linda embraced the media attention like a politician during an election year, portraying herself as a dedicated guardian of property values battling commercial encroachment. She scheduled press interviews on her manicured front lawn, strategically positioned beside her husband's massive RV, while condemning my work trucks for destroying the neighborhood's character. The hypocrisy was thicker than wet concrete and twice as apparent. But while Linda was basking in her media spotlight and playing the role of neighborhood dictator, I was uncovering county records that would detonate her entire power structure. It was something about my property's legal classification that Linda had catastrophically failed to investigate, something that would transform the predator into prey faster than a concrete truck can dump its entire load, turning Linda's empire into demolished rubble. The discovery that completely destroyed Linda's world occurred on a rainy Thursday afternoon in the county recorder's office, where the air hung heavy with dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light and the musty scent of decades-old legal documents. Attorney Patricia had suggested researching the original subdivision development to bolster our harassment case against Linda. What we unearthed instead was legal plutonium that would annihilate Linda's tyrannical empire. Dorothy, the perpetually cheerful clerk who had been filing documents since the disco era, retrieved the original subdivision plat from 1987. The yellowed papers crackled like autumn leaves as she laid them out across the worn counter. Instantly, something caused Patricia to freeze mid-sentence. My property was not listed like the others. In place of a standard residential designation, mine was marked Master Developer Lot, accompanied by covenant language that made Patricia's eyes widen as if she had just seen a miracle. "Holy Mike," Patricia whispered, momentarily forgetting her professional composure. "Do you have any idea what you're sitting on?" I squinted at the legal hieroglyphics that covered the page. "Enlighten me before I have a heart attack from the suspense." She tapped her finger on specific clauses buried within the maze of covenants. "Your property retains master developer rights from the original creation of the subdivision. The builder kept approval authority over all HOA decisions, and those rights transfer automatically with ownership." The revelation struck me like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. "Are you saying I can veto Linda's rules?" Patricia's grin was so wide it could have powered the building's electricity. "Not just veto. According to these covenants, the master developer has approval authority over all new ordinances, assessment changes, and board decisions. Linda's commercial vehicle ordinance is dead without your signature. Her special assessments are legally worthless toilet paper. Her fines are invalid fantasies from a powerless dictator." We spent the next 2 hours excavating this legal gold mine while the rain drummed against the windows like applause for our discovery. The original developer had passed away 5 years ago. His estate had sold the property, including my house, along with all master developer privileges. The previous owner had either overlooked this jackpot or simply didn't care. But everything had transferred to me automatically. I had been in possession of nuclear weapons while Linda was attacking me with foam pool noodles. Patricia outlined the full extent of my inherited superpowers with barely contained excitement. The master developer traditionally holds a 51% voting weight in HOA matters. You can remove board members with a 30-day notice. You can override any rules that were implemented without your approval. And here's the best part. You can demand financial damages for the harm caused by invalid board actions. The taste of impending victory was sweeter than concrete dust after a perfect pour. But beyond my personal vindication, I felt something more powerful brewing. Linda had systematically terrorized working families, threatened elderly residents like Mrs. Morgan, and discriminated against anyone who failed to meet her standards of suburban perfection. Now, I possessed the legal authority to demolish her reign of terror and rescue every family she had victimized. Justice was about to be served in portions the size of a concrete mixer. "We could destroy Linda's operation immediately," Patricia continued, "but strategic patience will maximize the damage. Let her continue to excavate this crater while we document everything. When we publicly reveal your master developer status, the psychological impact will be devastating. Every rule she's passed, every fine she's issued, every threat she's made will become evidence of board fraud and potential criminal activity." I thought about Mrs. Morgan facing threats of incompetency, Jake Patterson being harassed over his children's toys, and Sarah Mills being targeted for her choice of car. Linda had been playing chess, assuming she was the queen, never realizing that I owned the entire board, all the pieces, and the table they sat on. The cosmic irony was more perfect than a flawlessly level foundation. She had been trying to exile me from a neighborhood where I held the ultimate legal authority. Walking out of that courthouse into the cool evening air, I felt as though I had inherited a kingdom. Linda had spent months making my life miserable, completely unaware that she was attacking someone who could legally annihilate her authority with a single covenant document. The predator was about to discover that she had been stalking an apex predator, and her hunting season was permanently over. The next phase felt like assembling the ultimate construction crew for the most gratifying demolition project of my career. On Saturday morning, my kitchen table transformed into mission control. Coffee was brewing while legal documents were spread across the surface like blueprints for Linda's downfall. The rich aroma of Colombian dark roast mingled with the intoxicating scent of impending justice as Patricia and I charted our course. "We're not just stopping Linda," she explained. "We're building a case that will protect every family and ensure this nightmare never happens again." Bobby Morgan, our forensic accountant and Mrs. Morgan's sharp-eyed son, became our financial detective. When I showed him Linda's HOA expense reports, his reaction was immediate and colorful. "Mike, this woman has been treating the community funds like her personal ATM. These administrative consultation fees perfectly match her bankruptcy lawyer's billing cycles." His laptop keys clicked like machine gun fire as he cross-referenced dates with Linda's court filings. Here's a piece of wisdom from Bobby's expertise that every homeowner should know. HOA boards are required to maintain detailed financial records, called general ledgers and check registers, and you have the legal right to examine these documents for personal expenses disguised as community business. Jake Patterson converted his spare bedroom into a surveillance command center that would have made the FBI envious. Timeline charts covered every wall, while photography equipment capable of documenting evidence from 3 blocks away occupied his desk. Every harassment incident will be documented with timestamps and witness statements, Jake explained as he calibrated his cameras. Linda's pattern of discrimination will be so obvious that a legally blind judge could convict her. The mechanical whir of his printer churning out evidence sheets sounded like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. Sarah Mills volunteered to be our community educator, using her teaching skills to inform neighbors about rights they never knew they possessed. Her own documentation of harassment revealed Linda's laser-focused targeting of single mothers, elderly residents, and working-class families. During our planning sessions, Sarah's insight cut through the legal complexity like a chainsaw through balsa wood. "Linda isn't just power-hungry," she observed. "She's operating a systematic discrimination campaign with HOA authority as her weapon." Sarah's strategy involved hosting backyard meetings that felt like underground resistance gatherings, where families shared their horror stories and learned about their legal options. Patricia outlined our legal strategy with surgeon-like precision. "Master developer rights give us nuclear capability, but conventional weapons will strengthen the case. We're filing for breach of fiduciary duty, selective enforcement, financial mismanagement, and civil rights violations." She had researched similar cases where board members had faced 6-figure personal liability judgments for exceeding their authority and targeting specific demographics. Patricia's smile when discussing the potential damages reminded me why I always hired the best subcontractors for critical projects. Bobby's financial investigation uncovered $47,000 in unauthorized diversions from reserve funds, including Linda's personal legal fees disguised as community consultations. Her expense reports showed payments to her son's landscaping company at rates 30% above market value, while legitimate maintenance requests were being denied due to budgetary constraints. The most explosive discovery was evidence of kickback arrangements with Pinnacle Properties, where Linda received consulting fees for facilitating the neighborhood disruption that would benefit their redevelopment schemes. Our intelligence operation expanded beyond financial crimes to document Linda's methodology of harassment. Jake's photographs captured selective enforcement in vivid detail. Her son's industrial equipment parked overnight, while my legal trucks faced daily persecution. Her husband's massive RV violating the very aesthetic standards she imposed on others. Her personal vehicles exceeding community parking limits without any consequences. We cataloged every double standard, every discriminatory action, and every abuse of authority that Linda had committed during her suburban dictatorship. Sarah's underground meetings felt like wartime resistance gatherings, where families shared their testimonies of harassment while she documented each incident with academic thoroughness. Mrs. Morgan revealed Linda's attempts to have her declared incompetent for maintaining gardens that allegedly violated aesthetic standards. The Hendersons described the foreclosure threats they received for hiring my concrete services. Every family had experienced Linda's targeting, and every story added more ammunition to our discrimination arsenal. Watching these families realize they were not alone was like watching concrete set, slow at first, then suddenly unbreakable. Meanwhile, I maintained my normal routines while secretly preparing for Linda's public downfall. My concrete business continued to serve neighborhood customers despite her intimidation campaigns, and every job became an opportunity to gather evidence. I documented Linda's interference with legitimate commerce, her attempts to ban customers from public streets, and her threats against neighbors who hired my services. Each incident strengthened our case, while Linda remained oblivious to the legal explosive charges being planted beneath the foundation of her authority. Here is the beautiful irony that kept me awake at night with anticipation. Linda was constructing her own gallows with every illegal action she committed. Our strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Let her continue digging until retreat became impossible, then detonate everything during a public meeting with maximum community attendance and media coverage. Linda had spent months building her tyrannical empire, never suspecting that she was creating the very evidence that would lead to her own destruction. The hunter had become the hunted, and Linda was walking deeper into a trap, baited with her own arrogance and seasoned with her victim's patience. Linda's desperation reached nuclear levels when she realized her campaign of harassment was failing. 2 weeks after our planning sessions, I received a foreclosure notice that looked more official than a Supreme Court subpoena. The thick legal paper smelled of fear and expensive attorneys as Linda claimed the authority to seize my property for accumulated violations and unpaid assessments. She had scheduled foreclosure proceedings for the following month, apparently convinced that this act of financial terrorism would force me to surrender. What Linda didn't know was that every threatening document she filed was digging her legal grave deeper than a septic tank foundation. The sabotage began subtly, like termites eating a house from the inside out. My work truck started experiencing mysterious problems: sugar in the gas tanks, slashed tires, and scratched paint that spelled out "Go away" in jagged letters. The acrid smell of vandalism lingered in my driveway like a toxic cloud. While Linda maintained plausible deniability by being conspicuously visible during each incident, she had scheduled her morning inspection walks to coincide perfectly with my discovery of the damaged equipment, thus creating alibis while maximizing my frustration. Watching Linda feign shock at my misfortune was like watching a toddler deny eating cookies with chocolate smeared across their face. But Linda's most devious move targeted my business reputation directly. Anonymous complaints flooded the Better Business Bureau, claiming that I had performed shoddy work, stolen materials, and violated safety regulations. Fake online reviews appeared overnight, describing fictional disasters involving my concrete services. Torres Concrete destroyed my driveway and flooded my basement, read one obviously fabricated review posted by Concerned Homeowner 47. The digital assault was so coordinated that it resembled a military psychological operation designed to destroy my livelihood through character assassination. While Linda escalated her attacks, I maintained my normal routine as if nothing were amiss. Every morning, I loaded my trucks and headed to job sites, documenting each act of harassment while appearing completely unbothered by her campaign. My crew noticed the tension but followed my lead, treating Linda's intimidation attempts like an annoying weather pattern that would eventually pass. The sound of concrete mixers rumbling to life each morning became our defiant anthem, drowning out the clicking of Linda's heels and her whispered threats. Jake Patterson's surveillance operation captured Linda's coordination with her supporters in damning detail. His telephoto lens recorded late-night meetings in Linda's backyard where she distributed assignments to her Community Standards Coalition. Margaret Finch was instructed to file noise complaints whenever my equipment started before 8 a.m. Bob was tasked with photographing every neighbor who hired my services. Linda's husband, Frank, was assigned to follow my trucks and document any traffic violations during concrete deliveries. The conspiracy was more organized than a military operation and twice as petty. The community pressure intensified like a pressure cooker approaching its bursting point. 3 more families received foreclosure threats over manufactured violations that would make a comedy writer weep with laughter. The Patels were cited for hanging laundry outside because it created visual pollution inconsistent with community standards. Elderly Mr. Rodriguez faced fines for parking his 20-year-old pickup truck in his own driveway because it was commercially branded with his plumbing business logo. Linda's enforcement had become so absurd that neighbors started comparing their violation notices like trading cards, laughing at the creative ways she had found to harass working families. Local news picked up the story when Linda called a press conference to announce her partnership with Pinnacle Properties. Standing on her manicured lawn, beside her husband's prohibited RV, she explained how upgrading the neighborhood demographics would benefit everyone. The irony was thicker than wet concrete as Linda complained about commercial vehicles while literally standing next to her own violations. Reporter Amanda Morgan, no relation to our Mrs. Morgan, asked pointed questions about selective enforcement that made Linda's prepared answers sound like a politician denying obvious corruption. But Linda's nuclear option revealed her true character in spectacular fashion. She arranged for city inspectors to visit my home on a weekly basis, claiming anonymous reports of safety violations and illegal business operations. Each inspection cost taxpayers money and accomplished nothing except harassment. However, Linda had enough political connections to maintain the pressure. The sound of official vehicles pulling into my driveway became as regular as mail delivery and twice as annoying. Linda's final, desperate gambit was an attempt to have my business license suspended through her connections at the planning department. She filed formal complaints alleging that I was operating an illegal commercial enterprise from a residential property, storing hazardous materials without permits, and violating zoning regulations. The paperwork was professionally prepared and strategically timed to coincide with her foreclosure proceedings, creating maximum legal pressure designed to force my surrender. Through all this escalation, I maintained the calm demeanor of someone holding a royal flush while everyone else was panicking over their weak hands. Linda was burning through her credibility and political capital like a house fire consuming dry wood, while I was collecting evidence that would fuel her destruction for years to come. Every harassment attempt was documented. Every false report was recorded. Every abuse of authority was photographed for future legal proceedings. Linda thought she was playing chess, but I was engaged in four-dimensional warfare with nuclear weapons she couldn't see coming. Linda's final acts of desperation arrived like a Category 5 hurricane making landfall. 3 days after the news story aired, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit appeared at my door, carrying a briefcase that screamed corporate attorney. The morning air carried the metallic scent of impending storm clouds as he introduced himself as Richard Castellanos, legal representative for concerned community stakeholders. His cologne was expensive enough to choke a horse, and his smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. Mr. Torres, my clients are prepared to offer a generous settlement to resolve this unfortunate neighborhood dispute. The offer was breathtaking in its audacity: $50,000 in cash to relocate my business operations and drop all complaints against Linda and the HOA. Consider this a goodwill gesture, Castellanos explained, sliding a cashier's check across my kitchen table as if he were dealing blackjack. My clients simply want to restore community harmony. The veiled threat hung in the air, thicker than concrete dust on a windless day. Of course, if you prefer continued legal complications and business disruptions, that is entirely your choice. I pulled out my phone and started recording, watching his polished demeanor crack like cheap paint in the summer heat. But Linda was not finished playing dirty. The smear campaign escalated from online reviews to a full-scale character assassination that involved Child Protective Services. Anonymous calls reported that neighbors with children were being endangered by industrial equipment and hazardous materials. CPS investigators arrived at Jake Patterson's house to inspect his children's living conditions following complaints about unsafe neighborhood environments created by commercial activities. The sound of official voices questioning parents about their children's safety because of my legal business operations caused my blood pressure to spike higher than a concrete pump. Linda's psychological warfare expanded to targeting elderly residents with bureaucratic terrorism. Mrs. Morgan received visits from Adult Protective Services after concerned citizens reported her as potentially incompetent due to neglected property maintenance and an inability to maintain community standards. This sweet elderly woman, who baked cookies for the neighborhood children, suddenly found herself defending her mental capacity to government officials. Watching Mrs. Morgan's confusion and fear during these visits was like watching someone kick a puppy. It required superhuman restraint not to immediately destroy Linda's operation. The harassment network had grown into a full-scale conspiracy involving city officials, contractors, and what appeared to be organized crime methodology. Linda's husband, Frank, began following my work trucks, photographing license plates, and documenting delivery schedules as if he were conducting industrial espionage. Her son, Danny, started bidding against me for neighborhood concrete jobs, submitting estimates 30% below cost in an effort to steal my customers. The coordination was so sophisticated that it resembled a military operation designed to destroy my livelihood through economic warfare. Community tensions reached a breaking point when Linda called an emergency meeting to announce the Pinnacle Properties partnership as a done deal. The community center reeked of anxiety and cheap folding chairs as she presented architectural renderings showing luxury condominiums replacing our modest homes. Current residents will have the first opportunity to purchase upgraded units, Linda announced with the sincerity of a snake oil salesman. Though obviously, not everyone will qualify for the enhanced community standards. The implied threat was clear: submit to her authority or face forced relocation through financial pressure. Linda's supporters began abandoning her sinking ship faster than rats fleeing a flood. Margaret Finch quietly resigned from the board after learning about the criminal investigation into HOA financial irregularities. Bob discovered that his rental properties were also being targeted for harassment and switched sides overnight. Even Linda's closest allies started questioning her increasingly erratic behavior and obvious personal financial motivations. The sound of her political support structure collapsing was music sweeter than the hum of concrete mixers in perfect harmony. But Linda's ultimate overreach revealed her complete disconnection from legal reality. She announced at the emergency meeting that foreclosure proceedings would continue regardless of community opposition, claiming that board authority supersedes individual property rights in matters of community welfare. She actually believed her HOA presidency granted her government-level powers to seize private property. Linda had crossed the line from neighborhood tyrant to delusional dictator, and her public statements were being recorded by multiple sources for future legal proceedings. The breaking point came when Linda attempted to physically prevent my customers from accessing neighborhood streets. She positioned herself like a human roadblock, clipboard in hand, demanding identification from concrete truck drivers and threatening to call the police for trespassing violations. Watching a 58-year-old retired bank manager try to intimidate union concrete drivers was like watching someone challenge a freight train to a pushing contest, entertaining for spectators, but potentially fatal for the challenger. Meanwhile, my secret preparations were reaching their final stages, like a demolition project approaching detonation. Patricia had authenticated all master developer documentation with county officials. Bobby had completed a financial analysis proving Linda's embezzlement. And Jake had assembled video evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The community was primed for Linda's public destruction. Media contacts were briefed for maximum coverage, and legal documents were prepared for immediate filing. Linda had spent months constructing her own scaffold, and execution day was approaching faster than gravity pulls falling concrete. The annual HOA meeting arrived like Judgment Day, and the community center had never seen anything like it. 89 of our 94 homeowners packed into a room designed for 50, with folding chairs squeezed together like sardines in a legal can. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat and rising tension, while the scent of nervous perspiration mixed with industrial-strength floor cleaner. Local news crews positioned their cameras at the back, their bright lights turning the meeting into a televised spectacle. Officer Martinez from the sheriff's department stood near the exit, having been called for crowd control, but clearly expecting fireworks. Linda entered like a queen approaching her coronation, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum with military precision. She wore her most expensive suit and carried a leather portfolio thick enough to stop bullets, radiating a confidence that would have been impressive if it weren't about to be obliterated. Her supporters, now reduced to 5 retirees and her obviously uncomfortable husband, clustered around the front table like bodyguards protecting a dictator. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps preparing to swarm. "Thank you all for attending tonight's crucial meeting," Linda announced, settling into her chair as if she were claiming a throne. "We have important business regarding neighborhood improvements and compliance enforcement." Her voice carried across the packed room with the authority of someone who genuinely believed she controlled everyone's destiny. The crowd's murmur sounded like distant thunder before a devastating storm. Sarah Mills stood first, presenting a petition with 67 signatures opposing Linda's campaign of harassment. Her teacher's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel through flesh. Mrs. Hawthorne, this petition represents families demanding your immediate resignation for abuse of authority, selective enforcement, and discrimination against working-class residents. The crowd erupted in applause that sounded like machine gun fire echoing off the concrete walls. Jake Patterson followed with his documentation project, reading a timeline of harassment incidents that made Linda's face cycle through more colors than a neon sign. Violation notices targeting single mothers, elderly residents threatened with incompetency proceedings, and systematic persecution of minority homeowners, Jake announced, while the cameras captured Linda's increasing discomfort. This isn't community improvement. It's ethnic cleansing disguised as property management. Linda's composure began to crack like concrete under pressure. These accusations are unfounded troublemaker propaganda designed to undermine legitimate board authority, she snarled, abandoning her professional demeanor. Mr. Torres and his supporters are disrupting our community's progress toward higher standards. She gestured toward me as if I were personally responsible for the neighborhood's decline. If you continue supporting this disruptive behavior, we will be forced to take stronger legal action. Mrs. Morgan struggled to her feet, her voice trembling with an emotion that silenced the entire room. You try to have me declared incompetent because my garden doesn't match your standards. You threatened to take away my home because I'm old and foreign. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she continued. This is America. You cannot steal our homes because we are different. The room exploded in supportive applause, while Linda's remaining allies looked as though they wanted to crawl under the table. That's when I stood up, briefcase in hand, and walked toward the podium with the measured pace of someone about to deliver a death sentence. The crowd noise faded to a cathedral-like silence as I opened my case and pulled out the documents that would change everything. Before Mrs. Hawthorne continues threatening foreclosures and seizures, I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. She should know something important about my property deed. I placed the master developer covenant on the overhead projector, and the crowd gasped collectively as the legal language appeared on the screen. According to county records and the HOA covenants, my property retains master developer rights from the original subdivision creation. Every rule change, every assessment, every board decision requires my approval. The silence was so complete you could hear the ventilation system cycling. Linda's face drained of color faster than water down a broken pipe. Those documents are fraudulent, she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice under weight. You're lying to manipulate this community. But Patricia was already approaching the podium with authenticated county paperwork and legal opinions that would stand up in any courtroom. Mrs. Hawthorne, I continued, enjoying every second of her complete meltdown. As master developer, I hereby declare all of your ordinances void, all of your fines invalid, and all of your foreclosure threats legally worthless. The crowd erupted like a concrete plant explosion, cheering and applauding, while Linda sat frozen in disbelief. But I was not finished destroying her world. Furthermore, I am calling for an immediate removal of the board based on financial mismanagement, abuse of authority, and civil rights violations. Patricia handed me Bobby's financial analysis, which showed $47,000 in embezzled funds. Your illegal use of community money for personal expenses constitutes criminal fraud, and law enforcement will be investigating accordingly. Officer Martinez stepped forward as Linda attempted to flee, her designer heels now sounding like a retreat rather than an advance. Ma'am, please remain seated. Detective Williams would like to speak with you about financial irregularities. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Linda's empire collapsed faster than a demolition in progress, her authority evaporating like morning dew under the legal sunshine. The immediate aftermath felt like watching the sun rise after the longest night in history. Within 24 hours, Linda was facing criminal charges for embezzlement, attempted extortion, and abuse of public trust, while her mugshot graced the local news with the caption, "Former HOA tyrant arrested for fraud." Her expression in that photo was that of someone who had just realized they had been playing poker with a card shark while holding a handful of napkins. The district attorney's office, smelling corruption like bloodhounds on a fresh trail, filed additional charges for conspiracy and civil rights violations after reviewing Jake's surveillance gold mine. The community's transformation happened faster than concrete setting in summer heat. Our emergency board election took place that same evening, with Sarah Mills unanimously elected president alongside a diverse group of working families who understood that neighborhoods thrive through inclusion, not exclusion. The new board's first official act was to refund every stolen penny. $23,000 was returned to families who had been financially terrorized by Linda's harassment regime. Mrs. Morgan received her refund with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, immediately spending the money on garden expansions that featured every flower color Linda had tried to prohibit. The financial recovery exceeded our wildest construction project dreams. The HOA's insurance company, faced with Bobby's forensic accounting evidence, settled faster than a demolition crew clearing condemned buildings. All legal fees were covered, plus compensation was provided for the victims of harassment. While Linda's frozen personal assets would fund community recovery for years to come, the Pinnacle Properties development deal collapsed like a house of cards when investors discovered the fraud allegations surrounding their partnership with our neighborhood dictator. My concrete business exploded with referrals from grateful neighbors and regional customers who had followed our story through news coverage and social media. The rumble of mixer trucks became our neighborhood's victory symphony, no longer symbols of persecution, but emblems of resilience and working-class pride. 3 families who had nearly lost their homes to Linda's foreclosure threats hired me for major improvement projects, transforming the targets of discrimination into my most enthusiastic advocates. The sweet irony was thicker than premium concrete mix. Personal healing came through unexpected friendships that transformed our community's soul. Jake Patterson and I bonded over shared interests in photography and construction, collaborating on improvement projects that brought families together like perfectly mixed concrete. Sarah Mills organized monthly potluck dinners where the aroma of diverse cuisines replaced the stench of contentious meetings, creating genuine fellowship from former conflict zones. Even Margaret Finch apologized publicly and joined our inclusive community efforts, proving that redemption was possible for everyone except the truly corrupt. Our crowning achievement was the Neighborhood Heroes Scholarship, established for local students pursuing careers in the trades. Using recovered funds and supporter donations, we honored Mrs. Morgan's resilience, Jake's investigative courage, and Sarah's community leadership, all while providing opportunities for the working families Linda had tried to exclude. Our first recipient was a brilliant young Latina studying concrete technology, and presenting her with the award felt like watching justice pour a perfect foundation for future generations. The annual Block Party for Unity festival became our celebration of diversity, triumphing over discrimination. Food trucks representing the neighborhood's various cultures lined the streets where Linda once measured grass with authoritarian rulers, while children played safely in areas she had declared aesthetically inappropriate. The festival's aroma of authentic cuisines mixed with sounds of laughter that permanently drowned out the memories of clicking heels and whispered threats. Regional media coverage transformed our recovery story into an inspiration for other communities facing similar institutional harassment. Linda's legal consequences continued to accumulate like compound interest on karmic debt. Federal investigators pursued civil rights charges for systematic discrimination. Her law license was suspended pending ethics investigations, and civil lawsuits ensured she would face decades of financial responsibility for the damages she had caused. Her foreclosed house became the neighborhood's most ironic symbol. The woman who tried to steal our homes lost her own to the very justice system she had corrupted. 18 months later, I stand in my driveway with my morning coffee, watching children play safely in streets where fear once reigned. My 3 work trucks gleam like monuments to perseverance, while Mrs. Morgan waves from her spectacular garden, which blooms with a rebellious beauty. The morning air now carries the sense of fresh mulch and brewing coffee instead of vanilla perfume and desperation. Our neighborhood has become the inclusive community that Linda tried so hard to destroy. In the end, this experience demonstrates that ordinary people can indeed defeat extraordinary tyranny when they stand together, fight intelligently, and refuse to be silenced by those who abuse power for personal gain.